Okay? I'm going to give you some more statistics, just more broadly, about what we found with the entrepreneurs we dealt with. Okay? The vast majority worked somewhere else. The ones that were successful, that we saw they worked somewhere else, they were not always entrepreneurs. So they worked somewhere else. They were like Michael Bloomberg, not like Bill Gates. The vast majority. Okay? Very few were always entrepreneurs. Very few. Of course, the ones you hear about in Silicon Valley have always been entrepreneurs, and that just adds to the sexiness of the story. But the vast majority of the ones you read about in the press, none of them are as big as, say, a Michael Bloomberg, who became an entrepreneur in his 40s. Until then, he worked for Salomons, I think. What about dropouts? This famous college dropout story that everybody likes to hear about, and is the fear and dread of every parent, particularly every Indian parent, their child might drop out and not get their third degree. The vast majority were like the Google founders. You know, they had not just their undergraduate degree, but master's and PhD or whatever. So well over 50%. Very few were like Zuckerberg, Steve Jobs, or Bill Gates, dropouts. Very few. I think Zuckerberg was a dropout. Did he drop out? He didn't finish? Loser. Sectors. You're a very serious crowd. Is it because of the general election or something? Is it? I knew we should have served alcohol tonight. Everybody's very intense. It must be the whole entrepreneurial thing. By the way, who do you think, just on a show of voice, I know we're being recorded, but they won't be able to see your face, who do you think is going to win tomorrow night? You all think? Is there anybody who thinks Narendra Modi won't lead the largest party? Yeah? That could be a landslide, because I've yet to meet somebody who doesn't. I think even Sonia Gandhi thinks he's going to win. Yeah. Very skewed, yeah.
Because if you have a population of 1 million or 2 million,
yeah.
and 50% is voting,
yeah.
and 31 constituencies, you are hardly doing 500.
Absolutely.
So, yes, they will be the largest.
Yeah.
Whether these numbers are close to this or not, that will be.
Yeah. Well, it's happened before when they had the whole India Shining campaign, and then BJP lost.
Like that because Modi has a very strong team.
Yeah.
It can vary because he may have to be more participative. But there we have seen one more instance here. 2 years ago, there is a state called Uttar Pradesh. There was election.
I am Indian. I went to school in Gujarat. I know it doesn't sound like it.
So people give them a very big majority.
Yeah.
So if that trend we take, then it may happen that even BJP can take hold, or it can stop. They have to. But let's see.
Yeah. But you think that? But they'll need a. They'll need a coalition to govern. You don't think so? That means a huge majority. That means a lot of seats.
You can see Jayalalitha's state.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree.
So they are moving towards.
No, Jayalalitha has already expelled that guy who was told him.
Oh, okay.
I really doubt that it will be so big, but elections there is a very contrast we have seen.
Yeah.
And these projections from last 2 general elections were not correct.
No.
So let's see.
Let's see what happens.
But it can happen either way.
Yeah.
24 can also happen, and it can be around 210
Yeah.
by BJP and NDA.
I mean, what's interesting, even when you had the Obama effect, the individual charismatic person who led a party and everyone, even that wasn't a landslide. Far from it. So even in other countries where you have this one individual who you think, yeah, yeah, true, absolutely. No, that sentiment I've been hearing.
Opposition was not even able to stand. They were not asking questions.
Yeah,
Like Congress was not able to ask questions. What is the Gujarat model?
yeah.
They would test it in other states. He was saying Gujarat model is not. Everybody said yes.
Yeah.
Because if you see traditionally Gujaratis are very entrepreneurial. There are very good books like Dhanda on Gujarati community. And what they do, they earn in US, UK and other
Yeah.
Plus, anybody in India also, they're very strong. So manufacturing, which happens out of some
Yeah.
clusters, is very strong in Gujarat.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a good time to be a Gujarati. I've been waiting 42 years for this. Let's get back to this. That's what I should have started this evening with. I should have started with the political question. Yeah. No. I felt blessed the day I realized I was Gujarati. I'm actually from the same village as Sardar Patel. I'm from Karamsad, so he's actually my grandmother's granduncle. So I felt blessed for a long time to be Gujarati and to be Indian. Actually, the Prime Minister had appointed, the British Prime Minister had appointed a fellow Patel as the champion for the Indian diaspora in the UK. So the British Prime Minister has been very keen to engage with the Indian community in the UK, given that it's so sizable. There's about 1 million of us there, and when you look across every single metric, from education to the professions to business, they do incredibly well. We integrate incredibly well. We're part of the community. We're in everything from parliament to business, every sector you name, every profession you name. And so he appointed an ambassador who happens, I say, to be a fellow Patel, to happen to be a Gujarati. The two largest communities, as you will know, are the Punjabi community and the Gujarati. But even beyond that, when you look at the Tamils or any other subcategory, we're all intermingling because it's a small community in any event, which is another way of saying you'll feel at home doing business in Britain, as so many of us have. But it's not a prerequisite to be a Gujarati or a Sindhi. Actually, the Sindhi community and the Punjabi.
You're forgetting Marwadis.
Marwadis, of course, they're immensely entrepreneurial, and we've got a large number there. Marwadi Sindhis, absolutely. Okay, so back to some of this data. In closing, the other thing that we found. So let me tell you some of the sectors, some of the companies that I worked with, some of the specific ones, just to give you some examples. I mentioned to you the one which spun out of NASA, the technology out of NASA. I mean, they're not all of that caliber, you can imagine. What we found, to give you a minor story, is that when they were launching the space shuttle, in space, food went off quicker because there was a high oxygen content in the air inside the shuttle, and oxygen is a prerequisite to food. Well, the greater the oxygen content, the quicker food will go off. So they needed to remove the bacteria or whatever it was which was causing some of the food to go off. Sometimes it's just an internal reaction which is accelerated, but sometimes it's outside microorganisms. So anyway, they created this technology, and what NASA apparently does is, with some of its intellectual property, it allows the scientists to either be co-owners or to own it if it's not going to commercialize it. So this was co-developed by a university in Texas, and they then commercialized it, as so often happens with space shuttle technology, space technology, and they made it into a little box which was, see how big it was. Well, it was probably not much bigger than that, maybe 3 of these stacked up. And put one of those there, and it could clean out this room, and you could do the tests within about a minute. Remove virtually every single bacterial spore in the air. Now, if you put that into a hospital or a cold storage warehouse, a supermarket, or a train where your fear is terrorist attack from spore-based organisms, you can see the applications across the board. Restaurants. You don't want the odor. Sometimes you want a little bit of odor, but you don't want too much. So that was one of the companies we brought to the UK. Another one was clean tech in water. It was water technology, water purification, major problem in the Middle East. Britain's a leader on water purification, maybe because it's an island, maybe just because we spend so much on research and development. If you look at the history of the world, the countries which have the greatest wealth, the highest GDP, there is a direct correlation between that and the number of patents they file. If you want to create wealth in a country, you get your government to focus on creating patents. And whilst you might think, well, quantity, quality, get enough quantity out there, you will find quality. And it's a whole different debate regarding India, but given the number of people we have and the academic caliber and traditions and heritage and history that India has of invention, it's nothing new to us. I mean, if you ask, I don't know, Singaporeans to try and invent, I'm sure they do a little bit, but India has a richer history than any country on the planet of invention. We could and should be leading the world in terms of the number of patents filed. It's very much in our interest to do so. We need a bit more facility from general business environment and infrastructure. But we got, all of these companies had their intellectual property and they were bringing it to the UK because it was easier to do business and from there go global. What we also found is a cybersecurity company out of here in Delhi, which we brought to the UK. It had very clever mathematicians. In cybersecurity, you need algorithms, mathematics, very clever mathematicians who were able to provide cybersecurity for firms, for government entities, for Fortune 500 individuals who were very concerned about their, not only their personal security, but what's written about them on the web and the right to be forgotten and so on, and they were in this business. So we brought them to the UK, and from there they've gone global. Why would they consider coming to the UK? Well, let me give you the idea of the attitude that we found with most of the entrepreneurs. So we went through the entrepreneurs, we got some anecdote, we interviewed them and so on. For them, the EU was like the US in terms of market size and population. In fact, the EU is slightly bigger in terms of GDP than the United States. You wouldn't think so. If you ask somebody randomly, they'd say, oh, well, the US is the largest market and so on and so forth. It's not. Both trading zones, the US and the EU, are about 250 million people, 250 to 300 million people, and the GDP is about $15 trillion a year. That's during a credit crunch with zero growth. It's $15 trillion. India went through the 1 trillion about 3-4 years ago, 1 trillion GDP mark. So it's 15 Indias. Well, now it's about 7.5 Indias. 7.5. That's with zero growth. If you're growing at 1% on 15 trillion, then heck, on 2 trillion, you do need to grow at 10% to keep up. That relates to another thing about the attitude they had. A few years ago when I was doing this role, people would rightly focus purely on the Indian market. Huge opportunity, still is. The attitude of the entrepreneurs that we met was they knew they needed to go global on day one. Because day 100 is way too late. They couldn't go global. There were very few we met who said, no, we are focused on a domestic niche market. Don't get me wrong, you can focus on a domestic niche market and make hundreds of millions, maybe even billions. Like a Naukri.com, focuses purely on the Indian jobs market. Okay? You can be huge and very successful. The vast, vast majority we met were looking to go global and early, very quick as possible. Part of that attitude was going global forgave a lot of mistakes, because the bigger the market, the more quicker you were able to hit your targets. The more you focused on a small group, then the more unforgiving, because your cash burn was still going to stay the same. The marginal increase in cash burn in order to sell one incremental unit in an age of the internet around the world meant that it made more sense to be global than just to focus on a small market, because the cash burn was going to stay the same, but at least sales could increase. And if sales could exceed that cash burn, guess what? Your board of directors and your investors are happy. Miss it by even 1%, and everybody thinks you're a failure. And that was the attitude. It became very forgiving to be global because your income could exceed your expenditure. And as we all know, expenditure always seems to be fixed and always seems to stay steady, whereas at least with revenues we can bolster them. So that was very much an attitude that they have. Speaking of which, and again, because I haven't got the PowerPoint, this would be the only slide worth showing, I think, on any PowerPoint. But picture this. If you resize all the countries of the world so that every country's size was based on the number of people within that country that live on $1 a day, okay, that live on $1 a day, do you know which would be the biggest country in the world? That is given that this was the largest, second largest economy in the world up until 250 years ago. As I always say, coincidentally up until the British arrived, but I'm sure it's just purely coincidence. It was the biggest, second largest economy in the world. If we put that to one side and we just talk pure business, you really don't really want to be fishing purely in a market where so many people have just got $1 a day to spend, because guaranteed they're not going to be on eBay. If you resize the countries based on GDP, then the largest trading zone is Europe. The companies that came over co-located. We had very few examples where companies, well, certainly almost no examples out of India where they closed their Indian operations. There were some out of Australia, out of the US, where they weren't trading there, and they purely had global headquarters out of UK, but most of them had European or even global headquarters out of UK, but they still had what they were doing in India, because what they were doing out of India is what got them there in the first place. There were some reasons, either quality or the manufacturing or whatever, but they were into Europe because $15 trillion versus $2 trillion is pretty damn attractive. Okay? Just a couple more quick points on attitude. Two more quick points. This was more anecdotal from our sort of interviews with them, and I've written a number of books on entrepreneurship, so that's why I've sort of done these interviews. Their attitude was very much with business was like, I think the best way to describe it was a bit like Zuckerberg stroke Edison. And what I mean by that, they saw it as an experiment. Every product they did, every iteration, it wasn't that they looked at a piece of paper theoretically and said, this will work. What they did is they got the product out there and said, oh, okay, that actually doesn't work. We thought it might. They were empirical, not theoretical. As Edison famously said, I've just found, it's not that I failed 99 times, I just found 99 ways in which not to make a light bulb. And the same with Facebook. If somebody had showed you that on a piece of paper, you would have said, are you kidding me? There's MySpace, there's all this other stuff. Psychologically, who knew that it would be so addictive? Or Twitter, you on paper would have said, this is a stupid idea. I still can't explain it to my parents. You know, it's too complicated on paper until you do the damn thing. And you, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Well, I see why I'd want to do that. I didn't realize I'd want to do that. My mum-in-law, let's just say I've got to like all her posts. We'll leave it at that, yeah? But it's addictive. It's the psychology of it. So they viewed the business and the attempts not as failure, but as an experiment. And you'll have heard this many times before, but that attitudinal change was significant to the difference between, not between first and fourth place, but certainly between first and last place. Because when it was an experiment which gave you a piece of information, then every so-called failure was a success. When it was something which didn't work, then it was a failure, and then a failure was a failure. Okay, so they were very much like that. Very few were like, say, Bill Gates, where I've got this belief that the future will be operating systems, and as long as we're in that space, we will make money, and we'll design things in a way, whether people want it or not, and like it or not, and whether it crashes, they'll deal with it. It wasn't that kind of an attitude. It was like tweak it until it was like the world is a laboratory. We're all rats that they're experimenting with. It's probably not a good analogy, but that's how it was. Final point in terms of attitude. Virtually all of them, we found this characteristic between the successful and the ones which were just okay. There were those who had mediocre, maybe fourth or fifth place ones, and the ones who won. The ones who won, they were quick. If we opened a door for them, we had a meeting with them, they met us, I could draw you a graph between how quickly they responded, sent the relevant material, followed up, and how much their company was worth 12 months hence. There was just a direct correlation virtually every time. But when we opened that door, they went through it. The successful ones didn't say to us, compared to the unsuccessful ones, and this actually then became a way of knowing who not to work with, funnily enough. The successful ones didn't say, can you come to the meeting with us? Can you do this? Can you do that? Can you do this? They weren't using us as a crutch. They knew they had something good. They might have needed just one or two small points. They were very well honed in terms of their emotional intelligence that, hey, look, we want to use these guys for this and this, But if we want to make 10 requests from them, we can't ask them to come to 10 meetings. We'll do everything else. We'll show them we're really good. We won't ever embarrass them. We'll make them look good. But all they've got to do is open the door for us, and we'll do all the other work. Those 12 months hence were just growing. The ones who took a bit longer, needed more help, well, as you can imagine, they weren't doing as well. Partly that's self-explanatory. The more help you need, the less likely you're going to do well because of the more help you need. So whatever reason they needed it. But to the extent that was controlled by their attitude, their determination, their persistence, their professionalism, call it what you will, that was a key characteristic. So guess what happened? We naturally, as deal makers, honed towards those companies, and those companies tended to do better. Were they doing better because we honed towards them? No, they were going to do better anyway. It just so happened we were able to be there and open those doors for them, which they might not otherwise have got opened. So that was key. And the final thing related to that was their presentations. I mean, there's a lot you could tell from their presentation. They might not be good at presenting, but they had done the obvious, easy thing, is they had gone and found all the best things they could get their hands on. They had begged, borrowed, or stole for their company a quality presentation. And there's next to none that I've seen. I probably would say there's none that I've seen which had poor presentation and yet managed to be hugely successful. I mean, it's a funny thing, I could predict, probably pretty accurately now, because I've been in this role 10 years, after a 30-minute meeting, how well companies are going to do, not based on a due diligence, funnily enough, of their technology, but actually upon the materials they're going to show me, how quickly they respond back to me, how they respond, what they write in an email. That sounds pretty weird. But actually, if you think back to some of the stories, you'll have read the biographies of Gates, or again, you've seen the film Social Network with Zuckerberg and the ferociousness with which, but politeness with which he persisted. It was those little things, because ultimately the investor was investing in the individual. People will say, oh, I've got a great idea. We really don't care for great ideas. Everybody's got great ideas. Ideas are easy. It was the ability to execute, and that's what we found from looking at these other things. Have they got it? Haven't they? And if they didn't have it, at least they knew, this is a bad presentation, let me improve upon it, because in the age of the internet and networks and friends and paying a little bit to get it improved upon and seeing what's out there, if they hadn't even done that, then that told me, okay, they haven't done that, they probably haven't done 100 other things, because that's the nature of personality and character. If you're weak on one area, you're going to be weak in all parts. And you could pretty much gauge very quickly who was going to do what. Didn't mean you didn't help all of them. It's just that you got an idea who was going to be on the podium and who wasn't, just like school teachers do. They tell. And for those of you who've got kids, you'll know. You can tell pretty quickly who's going to be your favorite and who's not. That's it in terms of this. I thought we'll open it up. I've spoken a lot. We'll open it up to Q&A about what I've spoken about, and if you want, about politics, but probably better stick to entrepreneurship. But I hope you enjoyed that in the data I've given, but I'm sure there's a lot of questions, more specific data, and what we do within the Global Entrepreneur Program to help those companies land in the UK and go global. So thank you for that to start with, and we'll do Q&A as well. Thank you.